Unexpected recent events have created a distinct possibility that we could see Cardano as legal tender in the near future. Ready? Let's go. Not many people would have guessed that a proclamation out of a small Central American nation would be the biggest news coming out of the Bitcoin conference in Miami, but here we are. This is Nayib Bukele, the President of El Salvador. He's the guy that made all this news. He's only 39 years old. Here you can see a picture of him at a government event in 2016, looking a lot like Drake. But this version of Drake has an army, and he hasn't been afraid to use it. You see, President Bukele has been accused of being a little bit authoritarian. He wanted to take a $109 million loan from the United States for law enforcement purposes, and it seemed like maybe the Legislative Assembly wasn't going to approve it, so he just ordered soldiers from the army to march into the Legislative Assembly. In more recent events, the Salvadorian Supreme Court told Bukele that he couldn't just arrest citizens for violating his COVID lockdown orders, and the Attorney General of El Salvador opened up investigations into 20 different departments of Bukele's government. So when his political party won 56 of the Legislative Assembly's 84 seats, he just took a vote and decided to remove 5 judges from the Supreme Court and fire the Attorney General. Given that he used the army on the legislative branch and the legislative branch on the judicial branch, no surprise that critics feel like El Salvador is backsliding away from democracy and towards autocratic rule. This, of course, puts Bukele a little bit at odds with very democratic nations like the United States. But despite all that, people in El Salvador seem to love Bukele because everything he did with COVID and for economic development and for suppression of crime is actually working, right? No surprise that when you exercise authoritarian power, you can be pretty effective at achieving your agenda. So why are we so interested in Bukele and Salvadorian current affairs? Because this is the guy who just announced that El Salvador is adopting Bitcoin as legal tender. A lot of people just sort of stopped there. They just sort of stopped there. They said, El Salvador is a small country. Market cap of Tether is actually larger than El Salvador's GDP. But this is a short-sighted interpretation of what's going on here. So this all happened because a guy named Jack Mallers, who's the founder and CEO, I believe, of Strike, which is a company that builds a wallet on the Lightning Network. Lightning Network is a layer 2 solution for Bitcoin. Jack Mallers went down there, sort of spent a bunch of time in El Salvador, got cozy with that government, and lo and behold, convinces them, it sounds like he was the one that convinced them to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. So this means something very special for the status of Bitcoin in parts of the world that go beyond the borders of El Salvador. The US, for instance, is very much a country of laws. And some of the most fundamental of those laws are the commercial laws, which are codified in a lot of US jurisdictions as the Uniform Commercial Code. And here, Andrea Tosado figured out something really important. She tweeted, US commercial law angle, if El Salvador actually goes ahead and recognizes Bitcoin as legal tender, Bitcoin then becomes money under Uniform Commercial Code Section 1201. Section 1201 of the Uniform Commercial Code has a definition for the term money in subsection 24. Money means a medium of exchange currently authorized or adopted by a domestic or foreign government. So if you have a medium of exchange that is currently adopted by a foreign government, that falls under the definition of money in the Uniform Commercial Code. Here, the very brilliant Caitlin Long explains why that's so important. If Bitcoin is categorized as money because it's been adopted by the Salvadorian government as legal tender, then that means banks in the US could handle Bitcoin just like they can handle any other foreign currency. Your bank in the US can handle euros, it can handle yen, it can handle foreign currency. And Bitcoin, if it becomes legal tender in El Salvador, can also be handled by your bank. Plus, corporations holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet would be able to account for that Bitcoin at market value because it's now money instead of the lower of the cost and market value. This is much more appealing to companies because when the price goes up, they can account for it at that higher value. So it's very possible more companies would hold Bitcoin on their balance sheets. So why is Bukele doing this? The optimistic part of a person would say, hey, Bukele's doing this because he understands the great utility of cryptocurrencies, and a large portion of El Salvador's economy is composed of remittances from Salvadorians working abroad, a great number working in the United States and sending money back to El Salvador. And the money transfer services they use charge usurious rates, right? They might charge like 50% of the amount that some guy is trying to send back to his family in El Salvador. They might take half that amount, like terrible situation for those Salvadorians working abroad trying to send money back home. So, optimistically, you hope it's because he's hoping that things like Bitcoin could improve that situation. The skeptic in you might also think to yourself, hey, when guys like him are marching soldiers into the legislature to get bills passed that the legislature doesn't want to pass, and they're sort of sacking everybody on the Supreme Court and firing the attorney general when the attorney general investigates him, that definitely doesn't put you on the good side of developed democratic larger nations. And you start getting afraid of things like sanctions, right? You don't want the large developed Western nations to sanction you and restrict trade with your country because you're doing things that start looking a little bit less like democracy and more like authoritarianism. And they might like freeze dollar accounts. They might not allow dollars to flow into your country, or they might freeze assets you have denominated in US dollars in US bank accounts, things like that. Bitcoin provides him with an out there, right? He can put the country's national assets in Bitcoin, and then there's not a thing the US government can do. Wherever you are on that spectrum, from skeptic to optimist, there are good arguments that maybe Bitcoin isn't the optimal cryptocurrency to solve those problems. So on the optimistic side, that he's just doing this to, solve the remittance problem, give his people a currency that appreciates and doesn't depreciate through inflation. The remittance piece of that is a little bit difficult with Bitcoin because we know the average Bitcoin fee, I believe I saw people on Twitter throwing around the stat that the average Bitcoin fee is more than the average Salvadorian person makes in a day, right? They have to work a full day's work just to make one transaction, right? So Bitcoin base layer doesn't really make sense. Of course, the Lightning Network is being offered as a scaling solution that can make Bitcoin make sense for El Salvador. This is 2015 technology, right? The Lightning Network white paper, I believe, was proposed in 2015 by these two gentlemen. The Lightning Network has some problems, right? It has some problems. Investopedia has this entire article here laying out how the author doesn't really believe that the Lightning Network completely solves Bitcoin's transaction fee problems, and goes into all the costs involved with opening and closing channels, routing fees, how keeping Lightning nodes online at all times makes them susceptible to attack. There's a lot of problems with the Lightning Network. Anecdotally, this is kind of consistent with a lot of our experiences too. A lot of my friends have Bitcoin, and they know I'm involved in cryptocurrency. If they owe me, $10 for a pack of beer or something, they don't say to me, "Hey, let me just go set up a Lightning node real quick, and then we'll settle that $10 on the Lightning Network." I've never had a friend say that to me, but I have had friends say, "Hey, do you want me to send you $10 for the beta?" That actually happens. That's actually realistic. Like, that's pretty easy. They just need to jump into their Yoroi wallet and they can send it to me. like right on their phone. But I've never had anybody tell me they wanted to open up a Lightning Network channel between us so they could do these small transactions, right? Transactions do happen on the Lightning Network in established channels, but it's not real convenient. It's not the easiest scaling solution ever. What's funny is even if we look at the skeptical case, that maybe Bukele just wants to opt out of the dollar and he thinks that the way he can accomplish de-dollarization of his country's national assets is by putting those national assets in Bitcoin, which the US government can't really manipulate or can't manipulate to as great an extent. Bitcoin is also maybe not the best asset for that. Because if you think about it, a national government wants to put its assets in something that has a yield, right? If they just throw their assets in Bitcoin, sure, it should appreciate on this same stock to flow 4-year cycle that we've experienced, going back since the beginning of Bitcoin. But there are bear markets in those cycles, right? And arguably over the next, 12 months, according to the stock to flow model as proposed by people like Plan B, we should hit a peak. We should hit a peak and then, the value starts going down. We will hit the top of the bubble and then the value goes down, down until we hit the bottom. And then we start another 4-year cycle. The problem is that Bukele's administration is on a 5-year term. He took office in 2019, which means he's going to be in office until 2024. If he puts all of his assets into Bitcoin, he may see some more appreciation in the price of Bitcoin. So the value of those assets would go up. But if the stock to flow model is correct, then we experience a bear market, right? How happy are the voters of El Salvador going to be with him and his party if the nation's assets balloon in value and then that bubble is popped and they go into a bear market and all of the assets are worth much, 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 much less. And there's no yield, right? Like he buys Bitcoin, puts it into cold storage, and it just sits there and there's absolutely no yield. That would probably also be unacceptable. But again, this might be where Cardano comes in. If instead of Bitcoin, he put those assets into Cardano, he can keep them in cold storage, just like with Bitcoin, but those assets would be experiencing the around 5% native yield in Cardano through staking, right? He wouldn't have to risk the assets. I mean, you can get a yield on Bitcoin by sending it to like BlockFi, but then you're subjecting yourself to a centralized point of failure. If BlockFi is holding your Bitcoin, not your keys, not your coin, they get hacked, it's just gone. Right? I'm sure that it won't happen like this. Bukele is not going to go through some transformation over the next couple months and suddenly turn around and say, hey, actually, we're not going to adopt Bitcoin, the Bitcoin standard. We're going to adopt, some other coin like Cardano. I don't think it's going to work like that. I think, El Salvador is going to adopt Bitcoin. Probably a lot of other countries will slowly start adopting Bitcoin. This is like the first domino to fall over. But I think once they start thinking about some of these things, like, hey, the Lightning Network kind of sucks and there's no scaling on the base layer. We love the cryptocurrency thing. We should probably look at other cryptocurrencies that have a more scalable base layer and have those layer 2 solutions like Cardano. And then they're going to ask themselves, do we want to be holding an asset with no yield? You have to give up custody of the asset to have a yield. Why would we do that when there are other assets when we can self-custody like we really want to and have a yield? You can have a native yield in Cardano and keep custody of the asset. It's hard to argue that an asset with no yield is better. So I think for all these reasons, I think the adoption of Bitcoin by El Salvador is a really good thing. It is that first domino to fall. And I think a lot of other countries will adopt Bitcoin. But I think once they start investigating and understanding the benefits of their cryptocurrencies, it's going to be really hard for them to resist adopting Cardano. Talk to you tomorrow.